The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight.
So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm Charles Christian and with me is Janie. You're listening to the latest episode of the Weird Tales radio show, available both on internet radio and as a podcast on all the usual podcast platforms, including iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. We've got our usual mixture of the paranormal, folklore, the just plain weird. But first, I've got a selection of news stories that I've been gathering over the past few weeks that have all got a paranormal stroke cryptozoological ghostly element to them. Our first story I spotted at the beginning of November is that Laurence Fishburne, the Hollywood movie star, is to feature, in fact star in a television drama series inspired by an alien encounter in Suffolk. It's going to be an 8-part series and it's based on the alleged UFO landings near a US Air Force base at Rendlesham here in Suffolk, just a few miles from where our studios are. It's the so-called Rendlesham incident, one of the biggest UFO mysteries that ran over 3 nights starting in the early hours of 26th of December 1980 when US servicemen claimed to have seen mysterious lights outside the perimeter fence. Since then, as anybody who follows books on the subject or internet postings, it has been a subject of conspiracy theories and conflicting explanations. Was it an alien visitation, a military aircraft, or a beam from a nearby lighthouse? Anyway, we wait to see that television series with interest, and in the meantime, as we've mentioned before, if you go down to Rendlesham Forest, they have now organised a UFO walk, complete with a UFO at the end of it that you can sit and have a photo opportunity with. And still on the subject of UFOs, again from early November, apparently a bunch of scientists have come up with an idea to beam a very powerful laser pointer into space so that aliens flying by might notice us here. It seems quite an interesting way of attracting attention. According to the stats I've got here, if the laser beam will be 2 megawatts in power, which is the equivalent of focusing 33,000 household light bulbs together in a single beam. If every bulb is about 60 watts. You'd need a 45-metre telescope to magnify it and direct it into space. Well, yeah, it might well attract everybody's attention. But of course, as we all know from the movies, close encounters with aliens don't always end happily for us earthlings. So perhaps tiptoe away from that one. Another story here, it's actually following on from a piece we carried earlier about the Pacific island of Palau, Palau, and the fact that they produced in 2007 a limited edition silver dollar coin that contained holy water. At the time we thought maybe this was something to do with local superstitions about vampires and protecting yourself, but it turns out to be actually slightly more in the fake news department, as Palau's main source of revenue, along with tourism, is producing and selling specialist silver coins and gold coins for the collector's market. Reminds me of my days as a schoolboy when I used to collect stamps, and there's a tiny little principality in Italy called San Marino, and they used to produce lots of very exotic stamps, typically triangular shaped ones, and I used to avidly collect them for my album until I discovered that they weren't actually real stamps. Again, it was part of the country's industry selling stamps. Oh dear, what a shame. And no vampires. Right, what else have I got? Well, the Vatican. They have released a game called Follow JC Go, which is based on the augmented reality game Pokemon Go. Except instead of chasing Pikachu, the Vatican version involves collecting saints and other biblical figures. And it's to teach you all about the spirit of Christianity and its ethics and general evangelism. And yes, along with saints, you can also collect biblical characters and Marian, as in visions of the Virgin Mary apparitions. It's available at the moment as an app, as a game for iOS and Android phones, however currently only in Spanish and Italian versions, but an English language version and a Portuguese one is promised for next year. And a Spanish journalist writing for the magazine Business Insider, Ana Munoz de Frutos, has reviewed the game, and she says after 10 minutes the game got boring. So possibly for keen young Christians, but not for serious games players, that one. Keeping on that spirit of Christianity and religion, new research by Pew, PEW, the research center in the US. They have found that self-identified witches and pagans in the US has soared in recent years to 1.5 million. That means there are now more followers of witchcraft, Wicca and paganism in North America than there are Presbyterians. According to a commentator, this explosion in the witchcraft population is due to millennial women embracing New Age spirituality, mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. So there you have it. Take up yoga and you'll become a witch. In a similar vein, the Satanic Temple, who are a religious organization in North America, say they are near to a settlement in a lawsuit against Netflix and Warner Brothers over the goat-headed statue that features in the Sabrina the Teenage Witch reboot. Now called The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, it uses the deity Baphomet, Baphomet, for those of you who are taking notes, Baphomet, and the Sabrina version implies it is evil. The representatives of the Satanic Temple say, amongst other morally repugnant actions, the Sabrina series engage in cannibalism and a forced worship of a patriarchal deity. Whereas we are nothing like that at all. We take the view that Satan is a literary character meant to rebel against God's authority rather than being an evil being. And the key issue is the fact that in the TV series there's a temple which has a statue there of Baphomet, a goat-headed god, sitting on a throne with two small children gazing up at it reverentially. The Satanic Temple's complaint is that in their own temples they also have a statue which naturally features the goat-headed god with two children looking up at it. And when you do look at the photographs, yes, you can see that they one used in the TV series is a direct crib of the one that is in the Satanic Temple. Anyway, it appears to be that lawsuit is going to settle, and everybody will live happily ever after without having to resort to firing curses at each other. But there's more. Still in the realms of the weird, let's have a little bit of cryptozoology. You may have spotted during the spring reports of a sea monster carcass with a split open gut that had supposedly been washed up on a beach in Georgia in USA. Its appearance appeared to be very similar to a legendary local water monster called the Altamaha, and it had a plesiosaur, narrow dinosaur-y type head on a long neck, and it had a shark-like tail, and there appeared to be some bright pink guts from it where it was assumed it had been savaged by some other creature which had caused its death. Some people said the photograph looked like a hoax, possibly a wire-framed paper-mache body with some real pink fish guts to add a bit of realism, and a pickled shark's tail. And lo and behold, in its September, New York artist and self-identified mythmaker Zardulu revealed on Twitter that she had created it using taxidermist shark specimen and paper mache. And she had ordered it to be left on the beach for someone to find. And then in October, it went on public display in a solo exhibition. And it's called Trichonis Artemisis, Rites and Mysteries. And it was staged at the Transfer Gallery on Canal Street in Manhattan, New York. So, sorry, no sea monster. And let's end with some sex. Okay. No real details here. This is a report from, numerous sources, but basically the Sun newspaper, and it's about a woman in England. She is a spirit guidance counsellor from Bristol, and her name is Amethyst Realm. That's a good name, Amethyst Realm. And she claims she has now dated more than 15 ghosts. But she has now hooked up with one ghost that she met when she was on holiday in Australia. And the ghost flew with her back from Australia. In fact, they were so taken with each other that they headed off into one of the loos on the plane and joined the 6 Mile High Club, which I suppose would be not very suspicious, just one person going into the loo. She says she has dated real men in the past, but finds that ghosts are rather better lovers and more caring, and that the sex with them is just as good. And she says she did once have a boyfriend, but it all came to an end when he came home early and found her in bed having sex with a ghost. Yes. Now, a few people have said that, this is a sad woman and we really shouldn't make fun of her, but she has had newspaper coverage, she's been on television, she's been on This Morning, primetime UK morning TV show, she's been in the Sun newspaper. So, she's actually been getting more publicity than you could pay for. And as I say, she is a spiritual guidance counsellor. And good luck to her for her publicity. A slightly sadder story falls into our love of all things geek. And it's a Japanese man, 35 years old, called Akiko Kondo. He encountered a 16-year-old pop star with long aqua-coloured hair. Her name is Hatsune Miku. And he fell in love with her and went ahead with a marriage ceremony recently. He spent $18,000, which by my calculations is about £14,000, on marrying her. 40 friends attended the wedding ceremony on the 4th of November, but surprisingly his parents did not. Well, actually, not that surprisingly, because sadly, Hatsune Miku is not a real person. She is a hologram, a computer-generated singing software hologram. The ceremony included the exchange of wedding rings, although as his wife was a hologram, he had a stuffed doll shaped in her image, and he placed the wedding ring on her finger. The doll, it should be noted from the photographs, is only about 2 foot tall. Kondo says, this is the groom, that he received good wishes and congratulations from friends and fellow Hatsune Miku fans on Twitter, although he was also accused of being creepy. And he is among 3,700 Japanese who've signed up for marriage registration forms offered by the tech developer Gatebox, enabling them to wed their favourite virtual characters. He says he hopes it will inspire people to find marital happiness in whatever form it might take. And that includes spending £14,000 marrying a doll. I thank you.
Something wicked this way comes. Weird Harvest Press presents Harvest Hymns, the sweet fruits and twisted roots of folk horror, a 2-volume set of books investigating the music of folk horror, featuring contributions from some of the biggest names in the field: Candia McCormack, Johnny Trunk, Maddie Pryor, Sharon Krause, Jim Jupp and Kemper Norton, to name just a few. Available now via lulu.com. 100% of all Weird Harvest Press profits are donated to wildlife charities.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man. The Wicker Man.
You are listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian on internet radio and podcast.
We're now firmly into the holiday season, what with Thanksgiving this weekend, and in a couple of weeks the UK will be slipping into the annual slowdown of Christmas and New Year. And associated with that, of course, is travel, as we travel from one end of the country to the other to visit our nearest and dearest, or they travel to visit us. So I thought I'd dig through my books of spells to see if there were any travel-related spells that you might find useful. Here's one I found. It's called a Traveller's Home Protection Spell. And the idea is, before you go on a journey, you carry out this spell to protect the home that you're leaving behind, or if you are travelling and leaving some of your members of your family behind, to protect them, or even your pets, goldfish, whatever. So, 3 days before departure, gather 7 small stones. Any stones will do, nothing special. Spit on each one. Then place them outside the house, one at each of the home's 4 corners, one on either side of the front door and one over the door. You should be able to find a lintel or something that's over the top of your door. And even if you're living in an apartment, you can do the same thing with the building and your front door to the apartment. Then take some salt in the palm of your hand and from the outside, facing the house or facing your apartment, blow the salt at your home. And that will protect it. Or not. Here's another one, a little very simple one, still on the subject of stones. If you are driving, keep a tiger's eye gemstone, and you can pick those up for £1 or £2 in any shop that sells magical accoutrements. Get an eye of the tiger gemstone, maybe several of them, put them in a small bag and keep them in the car. Probably best in your glove compartment, and apparently they will help prevent accidents. And there's another one here, very similar. You might want to also keep this in a bag, and we're talking about a herb called plantain. This is the herb rather than the plant that looks a bit like bananas. We're not talking about bananas. Obtain some plantain leaves, put them in your car, and this will prevent malicious spirits from attempting to enter the car and co-pilot it. In other words, you'll be able to focus on your driving, you won't get distracted, you won't start falling asleep at the wheel, which sounds good. And of course, finally, when you get to your location, you need to park. And by chance, we have a spirit valet parking spell. This is what you do where you're in an area and car parking can be a problem when you're going to arrive at your destination. So you begin this spell before you arrive at your destination. You start by requesting assistance from whoever you perceive as your spirit or guide or magical patron, your favourite saint, whatever. You can also use your guardian angel or make a request to your fairy godmother or an ancestral spirit, your family ancestors. Tell them what you need, then make up a little rhyme or chant, something like this. I need a safe spot. Close to home, it's getting late, I don't want to roam. And then as you approach, keep repeating it. I need a safe spot, close to home, it's getting late, I don't want to roam. And you keep repeating this until your space is found. Of course, cynics would say if you drive around long enough, eventually a space will arrive anyway. But there we are. Well, I hope those help. A little spell there for parking, a couple of safety ones, and one for protecting your home. But whatever you do, happy holidays.
If you want to grow your business, save time using the latest tech, and look great online, Weird Appeal Digital can help. We have a free, yes, that's free download listing 40 digital tools, apps and resources to help you grow your brand, promote your project, generate leads, and reach your audience. Just go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales. For smart, effective digital design and your free download, go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales.
Here's an event in our diary of folklore events and dates to remember that Janie normally covers that we haven't covered before. And it's the 17th of November, which is both St Hugh's Day and Crownation Day. Yes, I did say Crownation, cross between crowning and coronation. The original basis for the day was St Hugh of Lincoln. It was his holy day. And back before the Reformation, along with St Thomas Becket, St Hugh of Lincoln, who was a monk and later Bishop of Lincoln, and very important political player in that era's history. He lived from 1135 and died in the year 1200. Became a saint in the year 1220. And he was, I say, one of the most popular Catholic saints in England. He's remembered for the fact his emblem is a swan, which is said to be a reference of a swan that used to swim around where he had his bishop's palace in Stowe. And the swan struck up a friendship with the saint and would guard him while he slept. And the swan would follow him about, and when he moved to Lincoln, the swan came with him, and it would eat out of his hand, but was totally tame when it was around Hugh. But if anybody came near him, there was a good chance the swan would attack him. So if you see any of the icons of St Hugh, typically he's standing there with his bishop's crozier in one hand, patting the head of a white swan. Anyway, more about Hugh later. As I say, he was a very popular saint in pre-Reformation England. However, during the Reformation, his feast day, the 17th of November, was cancelled because, of course, part of the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, meant all the Catholic feast days were thrown on the rubbish heap of history. And instead, it was taken over as Crownation Day, because this was the day that Queen Elizabeth, or Queen Elizabeth I as she now is, became queen. She took the throne, began her reign. It wasn't when she actually went through a formal coronation, it was just when she was crowned. So it was generally known as Crownation Day, and it was a very popular event involving bonfires and feasting and lots of celebrations and drunkenness, the likes, as goes with those things. And indeed, for many years, right through, in fact, there were still people practicing, celebrating Crownation Day in the 18th century. And at that time, along with November the 5th, it was one of the top events. So there you have it, 17th November. If you're wondering what to do on that evening, well, you have a choice. You can celebrate St Hugh's Day and be nice to swans, or you can celebrate Crownation Day and have a bonfire and remember when good Queen Bess took the throne. However, the reason why we have a particular soft spot here on this show for St Hugh of Lincoln is that he features in a story by another of our favourite characters, William of Newburgh, the 12th century chronicler and historian. William of Newburgh, or Newburgh, now pronounced, or as we like to call him, Will Parvus, he wrote a story about a revenant. Revenants in William of Newburgh's time, they're really a cross between zombies and vampires. The two concepts hadn't really emerged in English literature at that time. And so we had a revenant, which is basically someone who comes back from the dead, but unlike a ghost, which is just a spirit, these were physical manifestations. And his story tells of a woman in Buckinghamshire whose husband had recently died. The deceased returned from the dead one night and tried to climb into bed with her, and I quote, not only terrified her on awakening, which seems an understatement, but nearly crushed her by the insupportable weight of his body. These post-mortem amorous advances continued for 3 nights, after which the revenant started making his nocturnal visits to his former neighbours and other members of the family nearby, before eventually extending into rambling walks around the village in broad daylight. He thus became, wrote William of Newburgh in another understatement, a serious nuisance. The villagers complained to the local priest, who referred the matter to the bishop, Hugh of Lincoln, then living in London, and he solved the problem by writing a letter of absolution for the deceased. This was the deceased, that's the revenant's tomb, was then opened and the letter placed on the chest of the corpse before the grave was sealed one final time. And apparently it worked. After that, nobody saw the revenant wandering around troubling the living again. So, another reason to be grateful for St Hugh of Lincoln. And that's it. Janie and I look forward to joining you again next time. But until then, may your gods and goddesses protect you from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon,
which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.